Content warning. The following will contain imagery and discussion on drug use, overdose, death, mental illness, and other potentially triggering subject matter. Viewer discretion is strongly advised. The views and opinions discussed on this panel do not necessarily reflect those of Recovery Unplugged. And we're live.
How's everybody doing today?
Great, thank you.
Hey.
I'd like to welcome everybody to our second episode of Dopesick, of our Dopesick panel. As promised for last week, we have a full panel of some experts in the field, and I'd like to start out just by introducing everyone on this panel. So, I'd like to first introduce Dr. Wershan. Dr. Wershan, thank you for coming.
Thank you for having me.
Dr. Wershan is the medical director for the Austin Recovery Unplugged facility. She's been practicing for over 5 years there, and she's made a significant impact on addiction. I'd also like to introduce Carl Bremmer. Carl Bremmer has 17 years of sobriety. With his 16th year, I got to celebrate with him, which was an amazing day. And thank you for sharing that experience with me, Carl. And I'd also like to introduce Dr. David Frank. Dr. David Frank has seriously impacted the community of addiction by helping repair the inside by helping repair the outside as well. So, Dr. David Frank, thank you for coming on with us today.
Honored to be here.
All right. So, what an episode. What an episode. Just an amazing episode. It had a little bit of everything, and I just kind of want to go around and get everybody's sort of feedback on what they thought about the episode. Dr. Frank, what did you think about the episode?
I mean, for me, I could resonate with a couple different elements, one of which is just watching a desperate father trying to help a son and not getting a message through, and feeling like you are fighting so hard in trying to, I guess, climb a mountain that's impossible to get over because you're getting shut down at every possible turn, and being basically told none of what you think is true. That's really, really hard to deal with when you're competing against, a medical community that has all of these professions and degrees, but your family is suffering, your son is suffering. Like, how do you get over it? I think we can all feel that level of human compassion, no matter whether or not you have personally suffered and battled through addiction or not. Watching that turmoil is gut-wrenching. And then looking at it from the element of being a provider and in trying to understand your patients and your audience, because you want to be able to give and heal and help alleviate pain, and not really understanding, especially from that timeline back in the late 90s of what these drugs were doing, in what you thought was doing something of value and benefit and healing, is going completely counter, and being totally blindsided by that, and seeing what has happened here 20 some odd years later. It's a real tragedy to be able to see how all that played out.
Absolutely. Carl, what are your thoughts? What's your feedback on this last episode?
I am officially Team Betsy. I am down to see Betsy get help. I really related to watching her parents struggle with not just her sexuality, but just loving her, and where the intervention finally got to the place of, we don't care, we just want you to be safe. I have an adult child in addiction, and so my heartstrings were very much pulled at that moment with the intervention when she just was not ready and she was walking out the door. But I believe Betsy's going to make it. I'm Team Betsy all the way. And again, I think I had no idea how. I like seeing all the underlying motives throughout this series, Who's motivated by what in the relationships. And as a professional counselor, I kept connecting even the main character, the drug designer, and the issues he was having in his immediate family with the relationships, the brother, the father, and the rejection. And again, just the strive to do better. I just think that the Hulu producers are doing a great job of sucking in the viewer because I am all in. I can't wait for the next episode. And I find it to be not only dramatic, but very educational. So I like that both components are there. All in.
Absolutely. Dr. Roshan, what about you?
I thought it was a really good depiction of how quickly an addiction can develop. The beginning of the episode, you see the doctor getting started on a tiny dose relative to the other people in the show that quickly develops into him taking his patient's medications, and then ends up showing what it looks like to be in full withdrawal and feeling the pain that people go through when they're withdrawing. So that was a good description for people that aren't familiar with it or people that have seen it from afar and aren't really sure what they're seeing. I think something else that's going to be interesting is to see how he gets out of it, because they kind of allude to it at the beginning of the series where he's not, he's testifying and he's obviously not in withdrawal at the time. So it'll be interesting to see how that plays out.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Joseph.
Oh man. I'm like Carl. This episode was a real roller coaster for me. I felt a lot of emotions. I was infuriated at that lady pushing drugs at the 12-step meeting. Infuriated.
Man.
And part of me was also like, I know that happens at 12-step meetings, but like with people seeing it in this format on this show, I'm like, people are going to think that that's what happens at 12-step meetings. So that kind of bugged me a little bit. I was infuriated at the pseudoscience thing. I mean, the pseudo addiction thing, that was the biggest I'm gonna cuss. That was the biggest crock of shit I've ever heard in my life. Like, that was, as someone in recovery who has also dedicated their life professionally to the recovery of others, it hurt my stomach. It hurt my stomach hearing that.
However, I do know that is a reality of addiction, right? And I think that this show was decided to kind of go out on that limb and take the chance. And I don't know where I fall, but they definitely went out on the limb to sort of introduce that, as far as, that being a part of reality, that, that it is something that can happen, right?
Is it though? Is it?
It is.
Dr. Wershan, is that
Dr. Wershan, come on.
I'm not following where, I'm agreeing with Joseph. I think the way that they spun it was basically how people used to look at addiction. I think that it used to be a moral flaw, or that a person would fall into an addiction because that's just their fault. I mean, the guy described, these people overtook the medication and it was their fault, and they should have been more mindful of their genetics. Like, nobody wakes up wanting to be an addict. So I think the pseudo addiction piece to me felt more like the way that the pharmaceutical company was trying to spin it into
marketing.
I completely agree with that. But I think where I was discussing with Joseph, when Joseph had brought up the young lady getting drugs at an AA meeting, and just how
you meant that part. Okay.
Yeah. The rest of that, no, I absolutely agree with you. But I certainly don't want people to think that if you go to an AA meeting, you're going to get drugs pushed on you. But it is a reality of recovery that you will be presented with opportunities to fall back into your addiction. And the key part is what do you do when that happens? What do you do when you're presented with that vehicle to go back down that old road? And of course, Betsy, she took that road again, and unfortunately, it's the reality for a lot of people who are on addiction. And it's unfortunate.
The other thing, real quick, just that really kind of, I realized it like halfway through the episode. They were kind of telling these stories, right? Like the doctor who gets addicted, the girl who gets hurt at work, and even though I think I don't know how much based on like actual people each of these characters is. A real person went through that somewhere. You know what I mean? Like every scenario they present is a scenario that actually happens to someone somewhere in our country. You know, and you could mix and match like all these different plot points and characteristics and experiences, like almost to an infinite degree, and you would still come up with someone who existed or exists in the United States. You know, like if we said a lactose intolerant vegan farmer from Oregon who grew up in an interracial household who got addicted to opiates because he had teeth reconstruction surgery or something, right? That guy exists somewhere, you know, as random as all that is. I bet you that's real, you know?
Yeah.
So I don't know. It's just like, it was like, I know it's a show, but also somebody's watching this show that's like, that's exactly what happened to me. Like, exactly.
So
how do you
Andrea,
guys see? Oh, sorry to cut you off.
no, go for it, Dr. Frank.
How do you see this now, as far as, let's fast forward 20 some odd years later? Do you see the same scenarios and stories still happening to the same degree, or have we improved or learned at all in America, and how to better manage these kind of really kind of struggling early phases, being very vulnerable, being, you know, basically exploitable when you go to an AA meeting? Has it gotten better? Are there more red flags out there? Are we able to better nurture people through the rehabilitation process?
So I think that's a great question for for Carl Bremmer. Carl's been sort of on both sides of the addiction, and he's been a massively important part of recovery in Tennessee. Carl, what do you see?
I say yes and no to that question. I think we've come a long ways in the aspect of helping clients understand tolerance and that there are side effects. And I think the providers educate better. But in the rooms of AA, I still think there's very much a stigma of what is your drug and are you in the right room? The one thing I like about 12-step meetings and having an open format is anybody can come and anyone can learn about addiction and recovery. I've sat next to nursing students and to mom and dads and the addicts and alcoholics, and the rooms are safe to a certain degree, but there are predators that will prey upon people for relationships that are weak, that are struggling, that are very vulnerable. And I think we've shifted away from, again, the room being more safe chemical wise, but I feel like the rooms feel more unsafe when it comes to relationships. That's one thing I've noticed in the 12-step community is there's a little too much overlapping with lonely hearts. I'm sober, so I got this crossover addiction. I really need validation. I need love, and I need acceptance. And I see it in Texas and Tennessee and across everywhere where I send my client and get into the meeting, and they're like, they feel a little bit preyed upon with relationships, but they do feel safe chemical wise as far as drugs, what I'm seeing.
Well, that's improvement. We're making a dent, right? And that's what we're here for. Dr. Vershan, a question came through, and I'd like for you to answer it or see if you can give some input. It's from Andrea Cook, and she asks, are you seeing more people committing suicide because they can't get medicine for chronic pain in the U.S.?
The short answer to that question is that when someone commits suicide, we really don't know the exact reason why they do it. So often people can guess why it's happening, or they might have an idea. Sometimes there's letters left behind, but I don't know that that's something that could be easily tracked. What I do know is that sometimes what will happen is that people feel hopeless whenever they do have chronic pain syndromes, and if they're not getting a proper, well-rounded approach, not only to include potential medication options, but physical therapy, emotional therapy, different kinds of help that they can get, then it can be a very dark place, and that can sometimes be something that leads to depression and suicidal thoughts.
Yeah. Okay. Jason, we haven't heard from you. I wanted to get your feedback on doctor shopping and pill mills and how they've contributed to the epidemic's proliferation. Tell me what your insight is into that.
Well, my experience was I was already in active addiction. I wasn't too far in, but the pill mills in Broward County, Florida, is where I really, where my problem really took off, because it was just so easy. The pills were just so attainable that, you know, I was going and getting lower level opiates off of, you know, some just off of the street, and then, you know, the guys were just like, "Why don't you just go to a doctor?" And I was like, okay. And I thought, like, well, there's nothing wrong with me. So I found a doctor who would give me an MRI and fill my prescription at the same time with, like, essentially no questions asked. And I was working in nightclubs at the time, and the doctor was like a party guy. And he was just like, I was like, I'll get you in if you know, if you want. And like, this guy would just throw pills at me, essentially. And then I had gotten into a very minor car accident. And I was, after it happened, I was so excited because now I could go to more doctors and get more pills. And because there was a loophole in the database there at the time. So I was going to 3 or 4 doctors. Everybody I knew was going to 3 or 4 doctors. So it was almost like an endless supply. And, you know, you hear the saying sometimes, like, I didn't know I had a drug problem until the drugs ran out. And, you know, imagine an entire community like that. And not just one community, but people were coming from Kentucky, people were coming from Chicago, people were coming from all over the US to like one street in Broward County, Commercial Boulevard. And I believe at one point that's where like 70% of all manufactured oxycodone were going. And then all of a sudden this dries up. And now you have people who, like I mentioned on the last show, you know, some of these people might not have had the intention on getting drugs. Some of these people were, you know, had pain, didn't know what they were getting into, became hooked, like I forgot the character's name, Betsy, was that her name? You know, it just happened, you know, it just happened. And now you have, you know, hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of people that are hooked on these drugs that they could no longer get. And it was just, it was devastating to the entire community.
Wow. I'd imagine so, right? The addiction stayed, but the pills left. And, you know, there was a huge vacuum and void that needed to be filled. And, you know, and then thus we have, you know, we have fentanyl overdoses, you know, every day, hundreds, thousands. You know, we have, you know, people going in and out of addiction, trying to find a way to satisfy that addiction. And, you know, it's been difficult. And I think there's still a long road, but we've made a lot of progress. Joseph, I'd like to sort of change gears and talk about some of the cultural stereotypes and how they feed into the opioid epidemic. Obviously, you know, if you look at the show, we now have a doctor that is addicted to opioids, and you know, he was well respected in the community. Everybody loved him. He was a thoughtful guy. He was the town doctor. And now you know, we see him in the show, you know, skulking, for lack of a better term, around his dealer's house. You know, what are your thoughts? What's your feedback on that?
Yeah, well, you know, I really appreciated the fact that they, you know, they didn't open, like, I didn't know the doctor did drugs, you know, and he's been a character for, you know, there was 2 full episodes where we had no inkling of it. Even up until the very end of the 3rd episode, they kind of cliffhangered it, right? Like, will he, won't he? And so in this episode, we get this whole new introduction to who the doctor is now, right? Mm-hmm. And I really liked that because there's this stereotype, right? That, like, you know, addicts are, you know, genetic, you know, they've always been messed up people, you know, they choose it. And here we have someone who's, you know, as wholesome as apple pie and baseball on a Sunday night or whatever, who we've been introduced to as the good doctor, you know, like he's trying to do right by his people, and you know, he ain't making no money and he loves his wife who passed away and he's just this great guy that you love. And then it's like, oh, now he's an addict. And they kind of give the viewer that experience of what it's like in real life, because that's how it happens, right? You know, you have a child you love, a spouse you love, and you think they're great, and then that script flips on and I just I really appreciated kind of there's a little bit of artistry in that, the way they gave the viewer the experience that we've all seen.
Right.
And even more so, just like having worked in recovery for, you know, 12 odd years, I've seen every stereotype, you know, and you know, Dr. Worsham in her 5 years, and Carl in his 16, you know, and Jason in his 2 or 3, and Dr. Frank, even, you know, as a dentist, has probably experienced like, just like, it comes in all shapes and sizes. You know, I've met doctors on drugs. I've met attorneys on drugs. I've met countless restaurant workers. You know, I'm not talking bad about restaurants, but you know, there is no subset or group of people that is impervious to addiction.
Well, it's not a class system. Yeah,
it's not a class system. Exactly.
Yeah, and that's the real interesting thing, is I think until it really started to affect the homes of very prominent people in key political positions is only when this became more of a household conversation. And, you know, looking at it from, you know, dentists habitually being a very small, you know, business experience. You're not in a hospital environment. There's not all these administrative hierarchies. You only have like yourself to rely on. And in these earlier phases, I've been a dentist now for 14 years. I can remember when I first got out of dental school, you were just really naive to not only addiction, but the forms and the mastery of manipulation from all different class systems when they're coming for routine care. And, you know, you would experience, you know, what you would assume to be very prominent people that would not fix their teeth. And the key reason why is because they would rather get the prescription. Oh, I can't stay today. If you can just write me the prescription, I'll be back next week. And the stories could get very creative. And at no point, because we have this, I'm reading a book and I'm going to steal it here, a ruinous empathy. And what I mean by that is, as far as like, well, we don't want to say no. We don't want to ask more questions. We don't want to pry deeper into understanding. And we're supposed to come from this compassion. And we make assumptions of people of, oh, well, they'll be back to do the treatment later. And lo and behold, thank goodness, we had more government regulation finally coming out, especially with working with pharmacies, with departments of public health and public safety, of having to do screens on people. That's when we really started to identify, whoa, we have a substantial problem, because the same patient has been to 4 other dentists just today. Wow. With the same story for the same prescription. And you had no idea at the time, thinking that you were going to be helpful. Oh, it makes sense. They don't have time. They even scheduled something, you know, for 2 days out from now, when all they were doing was holding on to the same problematic tooth to get a prescription. And this is very well rehearsed. We're not coming in, you know, having that conventional thought of someone really down on their luck, kind of looking really kind of grimy and dirty and drug seeking. The artistry behind the story and the narrative and the acting is quite remarkable. And I think that's where we've gone much better, at least I think in the medical community, as far as being able to leverage these sources to understand what a drug seeker may not look like, but what those actions are, by being able to see these databases so that we can be held more accountable as providers.
Yes,
Carl,
I want to jump in on this.
Carl.
I'm married to a nurse, and same thing. She deals with patients that are drug seeking all the time, and the stories are creative. And from what I'm hearing from her, is that she's saying that, and maybe Dr. Wirchin can talk on this as well. The patients are getting more power of what they want and what they don't want with the power of the Google review. The internet has changed the game of, and I love how they included that in the show. Like, you give me what I want, or I'm gonna give you a bad review, and it's out of fear that the hospital was responding like, give them individualized dosage, like if that's what we're doing. And I think the internet's been a game changer where it's given the consumer, the patient, the client, too much power. Where if you don't give me my drug, I'm gonna give you a bad review, and that can hurt your income. I think we're being held hostage by drug-seeking clients with the internet and reviews now.
And I think that there will and there has to be, some sort of. I can tell you that, working in addiction for so long, that when we do, there are ways that we can challenge those, but for the most part, it is very difficult to challenge them. It is very difficult to fight against a one star that seems like a compelling story when in reality someone didn't want to stay because when they did the pat down upon admission, we found drugs on their person, and because they couldn't be admitted to our program with drugs, then they decided that they were just going to leave a bad review, and that is it's unfortunate, and it's not only unfortunate, it's very difficult to combat. You're right. So I did want to talk about the the story, two stories 30 years apart. The first one is a mayor of DC who was caught on tape trading government, local government, property. I want to say like snow trucks or something like that for crack cocaine. And he, and I mean, I could bring up clips of the Tonight Show with David Letterman, and everybody had a field day with it. It was the butt of jokes for so long. Marion Barry this, Marion Barry that, and everybody laughed about it. Everybody joked at him. They pointed and made fun. And 30 years later, we have Hunter Biden, who's recovering in his addiction, and the amount of empathy that we have for this public figure has switched, has changed, right? The addiction is the same, the cultural relevancy is the same, but the ruinous empathy has had an impact, right? And somewhere in between, we did not give enough grace, enough thought to what addiction was, so that when it affected others, right? It's that fatal attribution error. When it's someone else, it's their fault, but when it's me, it was someone else's fault. So I think that making sure that we're cognizant that addiction transcends income, it transcends race, it transcends your neighborhood, it transcends all of that. It genuinely will find you wherever you are, and that is why recovery is important, and that is why when you do find those in addiction, it's important to do an intervention if you can. And so we've had a lot of comments, from mothers and loved ones, people who have lost children, people who have children who don't know what to do and what are their next steps. I'd say, Joseph, if I were in a situation where, I have someone that needs help or that needs treatment or that I'm not sure what to do, what would you say? What would be the next best thing? What's my next?
Well, speaking specifically to like the intervention scene, I liked it. It did seem like a more loving approach than a lot of the ways intervention gets depicted.
Mm-hmm.
I would like to point out that that is not how interventions go. Everyone just says, hey, we're here for you. You need to go to rehab. And then an AA guy stands up and says, oh, your family's turning their back on you.
Tough love. Tough love.
I believe there's a time and a place for tough love, but just because you've watched interventions on TV doesn't mean that you're qualified to do an intervention. I always encourage people, I'll talk to moms sometimes and they'll say, hey, we need an interventionist for my kid. And I'll have to ask them like, hey, has anyone in the family just casually asked this person if they'd like to get some help? And very often the answer is no, right? Because, I don't know if it's because they're scared to have the conversation alone or whatever, but open communication and loving communication is always key to anything like this. So I always encourage approaching the person directly. If that, is unsuccessful, then you seek out an interventionist who's been trained. And an intervention doesn't take place, half-cocked like that. Most quality interventionists spend several days, with the families, collecting information, building rapport, having them write letters, getting an understanding of the client, picking a proper course of action for the person, right? You don't just say like, we're doing an intervention, you're going to a 12-step meeting. No, you have treatment lined up for them that is going to fit their specific needs. So yeah, that's my thought on interventions.
So, Dr. Roshan, there's this term that is common in the addiction community called harm reduction. Can you explain that for our viewers?
Sure, that's a term that I think is gaining traction and acceptance. It is involving usually medications that can help sometimes reduce cravings, reduce the use of illegal drugs, using things like medication-assisted therapy is one form. But also there's different forms of harm reduction, like needle exchange programs. There's places around the world that even have safe access to using drugs in places where they're monitored, and they have Narcan available in case a person is not ready to stop but needs a safe place to use without risking an overdose. Medication-assisted therapy involves Suboxone therapy, methadone maintenance, also involves medications that are not opiates like naltrexone and Vivitrol, and all of those things are appropriate ways to treat addiction, especially in opiates. So sometimes they're used, and I think that the longer that we see research coming out on how well people do just coming out of detox and staying sober, the more open people are going to be to looking at different options for patients, because not everyone can leave a detox and stay sober just through abstinence.
Thank you for that. That was very insightful. I did want to, Jason, there is there is this idea, right, that they introduced in this episode that, and we were sort of talking beforehand about the term pseudo addiction, and oh my gosh, it was a very infuriating thing to hear and to experience and to see someone, and whether or not it was I'm inclined to think that was a very close depiction as to how genuinely convinced this man was of his own new terminology. But Jason, talk to me about pseudo addiction.
Yeah, I don't know anything about pseudo addiction. I can tell you about addiction though. And I can tell you the difference about pseudo addiction. I know a couple of us were in a conversation last week when somebody had said like they had taken an opiate before and it just made them feel loopy and they didn't like it. The first time I took an opiate, I felt like Michael Keaton at the end when he was listening to the music and everything he longed for was suddenly right there in his life. That's what my addiction was, and I chased that for many years. There was nothing pseudo about it. The first time opiates hit my bloodstream, I knew that I wanted to feel that way every day for the rest of my life, and I tried for a couple of decades to do so. Addiction is the type of thing where you'll hear in the rooms, I used I did not want to use and kept using for probably a good 11 years. That's what addiction is. Addiction doesn't mean you don't want to stop. It means that you just do not have the choice. You don't have the means to do it. You don't know how for whatever reason. They did. I like how they talk about, and if they, out of context, or they used it against it, was talking about underlying causes of addiction, and they just said it was more pain that you need more medication for. But there's an underlying cause of addiction that and it's and that is individualized. Like you don't know, for some it's a traumatic childhood, for some it's who knows. It's different for everyone, but there's definitely nothing pseudo about my addiction.
I understand, and thank you for that feedback, Dr. Frank. They kept on referencing a study, which wasn't a study at all. It was actually an open letter to the editor that cited a very controlled amount of opiates given to people that were hospitalized that did not have access to any other opiates, and how the medical community, how we got it wrong. How did we as doctors and nurses and medical professionals see this data, right, and see this information and then misinterpret it?
I think so much of that may have to do of like where is your reference point? Where is your framework? How does that affect your particular practice at that time? And it's sad to say, but I think we still have to recognize that providers are humans with their own flaws, their imperfections and biases. And sometimes you can get so inundated with that. And then we also have to look at how the show was really created in the basis of all things follow the money, and how many people were manipulated at the time. And when you're a provider and working on your own practice, are you doing research? Are you going to take this peer-reviewed article and then follow the same methods and materials to see if you get the same result? You're kind of relying, just like patients are in a lot of ways, of I'm going to take the science that's in front of me, use the best practices, and do the best that I can. Challenge directly when you see it there. But I don't know if, especially at that time, and maybe even for some folks even today, is there enough information out there for them to feel like they can really challenge? And do they want to go up against the big behemoths and the big lions out there that could ruin their reputation? A 1-star review is one thing. Going against the grain in your particular community, in your medical or dental society, with your licensing boards, it can be intimidating of like, whoa, would I potentially lose my ability to practice based on how I'm speaking out about something?
I would also say that I think some factors they didn't really talk about in the show, but could have had an impact, is the way that the drug reps were pushing the medication. So
Yeah.
This study that was quoted was in the New England Journal of Medicine, which is one of the biggest journals in medicine.
Yeah.
But it wasn't a study. It was a letter to the editor. And so when you're seeing a bunch of patients throughout the day, you're doing what you have to do, you're answering phone calls, you're caught in the middle of your day by a drug rep who tells you, hey, there's this article in the New England Journal of Medicine, you're not going to stop and question them and say, well, what page was it on? What issue? Mm-hmm. So I think a lot of that also falls on the medical community, on making sure that if they're going to adopt a new medication, a new procedure, a new anything, they need to follow through and make sure that is something that has legitimacy instead of just taking someone's word on it. Because it does sound very legitimate on the outside, but then like they discovered it wasn't even a peer-reviewed article.
Well, I think in any profession, right? You interact with peers, right? You hear a nugget of information from that peer. You have no reason to not trust them, and you pick it up, and then you say it again in conversation with someone else, and these things sort of spread within industries or within communities, right? And I think especially like the clinical community is small in any given state, right? Behavioral health is a small field compared to a lot of other things. But then addiction-focused behavioral health is an even smaller field, right? So a lot of times it's like that like that Facebook echo chamber thing, right? Where one person has a piece of misinformation and they say it to somebody else, and so on and so forth. Like we were talking about, MAT and Suboxone and those kind of drugs. And, someone had a bad experience with Suboxone personally, or with a client with Suboxone, and they tell that story, and that story becomes a narrative of Suboxone isn't recovery, or it doesn't work. I saw Carl nodding his head earlier. You've probably seen it over the years, right? Like there's trends within professions, right? A while back, man, we thought horses were the cure to addiction, right?
Equine therapy.
Yeah. EMDR was a big buzzword a while back, Brene Brown, has a lot of sway over therapists in this country. So I think, like doctors, sometimes you guys get a bad rap, but it's like, you're busy, you're running a practice, you're trying to have a family, you don't have time like in school to review everything, and you trust what you heard from a colleague. And that's the reality. We're all just humans trying to.
There's also hierarchy too within these medical communities. The hierarchy is very important, and it can be very powerful. And there are key opinion leaders within the medical community. And if one of those key opinion leaders happens to carry a lot of clout, which also happened to get caught in the hype and is leveraging his or her clout behind whatever either drug or form of treatment's out there, you're not necessarily inclined to go against the grain. In most of the time, the key opinion leaders are trying to make your lives easier. Okay, they have kind of gone through all the sources. They've done all of the research out there. They have endorsed a certain thing, and this is the direction that we really want to go. If you attach a major pharmaceutical company with a lot of lobbying and money power behind that, it's hard to say, wait, hold on a second, why do we need to go against this, until 10, 20, 30 years after the fact, which is unfortunate. It is sad. You see it just in dental with certain materials. You'll get key opinion leaders saying, hey, this is the direction to go. This is the best thing for our patients, blah, blah, blah. Come to find out 10 years down the road, it didn't turn out as well. Those materials are not lasting as much as the manufacturer's ad spend wanted to tell you it would.
Yeah. So a couple of things, and we'll be wrapping up here. We had this question from someone that was really inquiring about, why does it seem like they're able to take their opiate or their medicine every 3 days, and they're able to stop without being sick? I don't know what that is. Dr. Roshan, can you tackle that for me?
Sure. The easy answer is we're not the same genetic component. So what I might tolerate really well, somebody else with a totally different liver enzyme set might do horribly on. And it wouldn't be, if it was that easy to predict who could do well on certain medications and who wouldn't, we probably wouldn't have addiction issues in the country.
Absolutely.
But really, it's all dependent on lots of things, not just genetics, but behaviors, the way that we've been taught to cope with things growing up, the way that we're supported in the community. So it's a combination of things, but the easy answer is we don't all have the same genetic component and upbringing to deal with that.
Absolutely. And as technology progresses, there is now genetic testing that will give you alternatives and the best and the best types of medications that will help you and help people get to the best outcome. So like Dr. Roshan said, it differs from person to person.
And those genetic tests, though, just so you know, are in their infancy still. So sometimes
very much so
they give a pathway to what could be considered, but aren't necessarily the tell-all.
You're absolutely right, Dr. Roshan. Absolutely right. So, Dr. Bremmer, Dr. Bremmer. See, I'm speaking, and here we go. We're gonna do it. We got to make it happen.
Kind of promotion.
Carl. The last subject that I wanted to bring up today is the difficulty of early recovery. Whether it's withdrawal symptoms, cravings. We saw Michael Keaton's character try to stop. We saw him make an attempt to leave the opiates behind cold turkey, just right, and only to see him punch through a glass pane to retrieve the last few uh, oxycontins that he knew where they were. Talk to me about early in recovery and why is it difficult?
Drugs and alcohol were my favorite coping skill because they worked every single time I used them. And I had a recent client request to leave treatment because she was just crawling out of her skin. The comfort meds were not working as well as she was hoping. And there's that physical and emotional discomfort for us as human beings that once you find something that makes that stop, and it could be a myriad of underlying issues. Sometimes it's pain, sometimes it's emotional, sometimes it's trauma. And early recovery, I know even for me personally, the depth and width of emotions in early recovery were terrifying. And just trying to wing that, I got sober at 38 years old, but emotionally, I was only about 15 years old, coping skills. And so I was walking around in this adult body with all these responsibilities and brand new sobriety, and you're trying to grow up in public. And we're in a society now where everything can be put on the internet, and your defects are almost made fun of now in a way where if you can't do it, then you create a TikTok video and you make fun of it, and then you self-diagnose, and then you research what you think you need, and then you go to professionals like Dr. Wirtz and say, well, I read this thing on the internet and I think I should be on Suboxone, and my drug has nothing to do with Suboxone maintenance or helping me. And so early recovery, everybody has advice on early recovery. And I think that's one of the dangerous things that social media has done, that even friends, I think, with good intentions of, oh, you're in early recovery, this is what really helped me. I really just encourage people who are watching this, seek help from professionals that are trained in this, we can do this in a way that's the safest, the most effective. And again, try not to mimic what you see on the shows. And I mean, it's great drama. However, I know everyone here has experience of helping people get better. And so the thing with early recovery, it's just very hard to grow up in public, and it's awkward. And there's a lot of fear, and there's a lot of pressure. I like to call early recovery almost like it's this combustion chamber building inside of you. And if you don't find the right coping skills to release the pressure, eventually you're going to explode and go back to your drug of choice because you're not applying the new coping skills yet. And you're new to them, and not all of them always work. And so that's why, as a professional, even in early recovery, I had 12 steps and meetings and a sponsor. And that's how I did it. And I sweated out the alcohol detox, and I did all the things and discomfort. But I've really, as a professional, approached the medical, the emotional, the spiritual, the counseling, the therapy, utilize every resource possible now to give you a chance because early recovery is so difficult.
Thank you for
Well
that.
said, right? Well said.
Can I chime in on one thing here that really bothered me about this show? And it's just how I see so much about this myth of opiates getting out of your system and you'll be cold turkey and good after 3 days. I don't know where that BS came from, because I tried to go cold turkey one time, and I listened to all those myths and all the books I read and the movies I saw, and like 3 days and I'll be through it. 3 days. At about day 17 or 18, I went to a meeting and was just like, I don't know what's wrong with me. And then somebody actually said to me, Hollywood lied to you. I was like, oh man, this is terrible. So if anybody thinks they're getting off opiates, cold turkey in 3 days, don't believe the hype.
So we had a question, and we're going to wrap up here. I'm going to ask a question, and we're going to get some final thoughts and then the last word. The question was, how has COVID changed and influenced, positive or negative, our care of those with substance abuse disorders? Joseph?
Oh man, I think like a lot of things with COVID, there's some silver linings and there's some struggles, right? I know, especially during like the early days of lockdown, right? As Carl was mentioning, we always encourage clients to join some kind of community, right? Addiction is a disease of isolation, and getting involved in AA or church or refuge recovery or any kind of supportive, healthy community is a massive benefit to people in early recovery, right? Even Jason just mentioned, right? Somebody told him, he went to someone in recovery and they said, hey, it's okay that you still feel like that, right? Having that feedback in that community is so huge. And when we were like on lockdown quarantine, there was guys, getting out of treatment, with 30 days sober, 45, 90 days sober, that had never experienced an in-person meeting. That experience of walking through fear, walking into a room, getting the lukewarm cup of coffee, saying you're a newcomer and having the room just light up with joy that you're there. Like, that's massive stuff for someone who's coming in off of a bad run, and so that was really negative, losing a lot of that community, which we've started to rebuild now, which is great. Zoom meetings, definitely were a Band-Aid for that, but I think you just can't mimic the real thing, right? On the positive, though, at Recovery Unplugged, right, we offer different pathways to recovery, right? Like, there's lots of different recovery groups that we think are equally valid, but it's not always logistically easy to take all the clients to all the different kinds of meetings they want to go to, right? If everybody wants to go to the 12-step meeting and one guy wants to go to the refuge meeting, it doesn't always work out. So having the Zoom meetings was really great for them, because we could say, like, okay, refuge guy, you can go over here to group room A to do your Zoom refuge meeting, and you 5 can go do a men's meeting in that other room, and you 3 can go and do your Celebrate Recovery meeting in group room C. And so they were able to get those experiences, which was really nice. And also now the advent of like these virtual IOP programs that came about because of COVID, getting access to high quality addiction care, whether it be through a telemed doctor or an IOP group, to like rural communities that may only have one doctor who is not well versed in addiction. It's big, so there's been good and there's been bad, and hopefully when things get as back to normal as they're going to be, we can keep that good stuff and get back to the way, the better stuff. I don't know how to phrase that last
no,
bit, but
I'm with you. I'm with you. Thank you.
Yeah.
All right. So, Dr. Frank, any final thoughts?
I see the medical and dental communities really wanting to help overcome this and to take responsibility, whether or not they were aware of creating some elements of this problem by not fighting all of these issues. I can remember when it was first coming out of, well, you have to do a drug screening, you have to use special prescription pads that couldn't be doctored. Then it turned into we had to send everything electronically. Then it turned into going into looking up the pharmacy's database. Then it turned into having to have your own unique app on only the doctor's, phone or whatever device that is the only area that can be sending out prescriptions. Is it a nuisance in the beginning? Absolutely, but we see the better understand or the better reasons behind it. And if we can help save those, especially during the COVID crisis, as I heard about how addiction's really a disease of isolation. I mean, sure, we have to be doing more and more of our part to help limit these factors. And I'm happy to see how much we've been able to respond in being nudged in that other direction there of not being complicit, despite our best intentions here, by being able to do these screens and really give people the best chance at healing without aiding to addiction.
Amen. Carl?
Yes.
Final words?
Just to follow up on with what Dr. Frank was saying, because we put a lot of things in place to make it more difficult, the stuff on the street has gotten dirtier and much more unsafe. And so I would say in my career, just over the last 3 years, I've lost more clients than the previous 12 altogether. And so because of restrictions, and we are getting, again, a lot more careful how to get the drugs, the streets on the stuff in the streets has gotten more and more dangerous. And so I just want to put that out there is please be careful where you get drugs as an addict, because we want to save you, we want to help you, and the stuff on the street is extremely dangerous.
Yeah. Dr. Worsham, any parting thoughts?
I think if for people out there that are struggling, if you're even curious about what's available and what options are out there, even if you're not ready to stop, just reach out to someone and learn about your options. You never know if that's something that might be a good idea at the time, or if you want to consider it for later, but just knowing that there's options and it doesn't have to be a certain way. I think that's really important. The other thing that I think is important for everybody is you can get Narcan in the state of Texas. Anybody who goes to a Walgreens can get one without a prescription. There's places like the Harm Reduction Coalition that will offer free Narcan. And even if you're not in active addiction, if you know anybody who has ever had an opiate prescription, you should have a container with Narcan in it available in case you ever run into someone who needs it. It's free,
Okay.
it's available, and it can save a life.
Thank you. Thank you for that.
Carl, someone named Darren P in the Facebook chat really wants you to say hi to them.
What up, Darren?
All right, and Jason, you get the final word. Jason, you've been in recovery for a while, and your story about your recovery. I'm not gonna make you tell it tonight, but I do want. There's probably a lot of people who are listening, who are watching, who have or don't know how the progression from addiction to sobriety goes. And if you could just kind of give us that pathway. What was the moment that made you decide, or that that was the aha moment for you that you were going to take recovery seriously?
And it's different for everyone. For me, I'm lucky to be alive. I flatlined twice, and that didn't stop me. And to be honest with you, there really wasn't an aha moment. I just got so tired of doing what I was doing. I had to give it an honest try one time, because I had tried for probably about 7 years, wanting to do it my way and chasing one more. Like I would go to treatment and then want to do just one more, and I'd chase that one more for a good 7 years. But luckily, the first time I asked for help, there were people right there, and those people were still there when I was ready for help. So even if you think like that you can't do this anymore, you want to stop for whatever reason, ask for help, build a support group, and then, even if it's not that time for you, but when you are ready, you will have these people around you. When you're ready to accept that help, they'll be there for you. And that was the most important thing for me, was just a support network, and I wouldn't be here without them.
All right. Thank you, Jason. Dr. Frank, I got to give you another plug for Walden Dental out in Austin, who, Dr. Frank has been making some of the most beautiful smiles that you're going to see. And Carl Bremmer, thank you for celebrating your sweet 16 of your sobriety with me. It was one of the best times that I've ever had. And Dr. Worsham, thank you for bringing an enormous amount of levity and knowledge to this conversation. Your brain is huge, and it shows. And Mr. Gorordo, thank you for everything. Thank you for your intelligence. Thank you for your time. And Jason, thank you for sharing your story with us. Join us next week, where we will be reviewing episode 5 of Dopesick. And if it's anything like this last episode, it's just going to keep on getting better and better. It's going to take us deeper and deeper down this rabbit hole, and it's going to show us more aspects of addiction and this opiate epidemic than we ever thought possible, or that maybe we never knew was even there. So see you next week, same time, same place. Take it easy, everyone.